Hello and welcome once again to the Fair Game podcast, We Love You Football. I'm Graham Miller, and in this episode we're highlighting the role of football club chaplains. Now, years ago we fans just assumed that every club had a chaplain, even though we probably weren't too sure exactly what they did. Now, the game of course has changed enormously in recent times, especially with clubs' squads boosted by having players in the changing room from around the world, and they practice a variety of faiths and none. So it may come as a surprise to learn that club chaplains are alive and kicking and still playing an important role in players' welfare, mental health and everything else in between. Their fundamental remit is to provide pastoral and spiritual care to everyone involved in the community of sport, but of course there are no boundaries. But as usual, before our conversation, let's get up to date with all the Fair Game news from our busy CEO, Niall Cooper.
So it's obviously hard not to start with wishing the Lionesses all the best in the semi-final against Australia on Wednesday. It should be a really challenging match, particularly after the nervy and narrow victory over Colombia. But best wishes to the Lionesses. But obviously away from the World Cup, there's been a lot happening in the activity between Premier League clubs and transfer and all that speculation that all happens every single year. In a week when the transfer window has gone into overdrive, it's important for all those listening to remember really what makes football so special. It's about the community, the history, the traditions, the kind of belonging that you have when you stand on the terraces or sit in the stands watching your team battling it out week in, week out. But at the moment, all of that is at risk as clubs pursue the unrealistic aims and dreams of a place in the Premier League or a division above, spending far more on players' wages than they actually earn each year. It's an unsustainable reality that needs to change. As at Fair Game, we've been championing for a long time the need to reward well-run clubs, to change that culture, that financial flow that currently exists, to really create a game that is fit for all and honours those traditions that we cherish every single week. There is a real chance to change the financial flow in the game. Let's just remember what Tracy Crouch mooted back in the original fan-led review. She suggested that we need to introduce a new solidarity transfer levy, a kind of stamp duty on transfers between Premier League clubs and between Premier League clubs and overseas clubs. She suggested that 10% of those transfer fees should be given to the rest of the pyramid. So how much would that add up to? Well, if we'd looked at the last summer transfer window and the one on the winter this year, that would equate to 2.7 billion worth of transfer revenues, or taking that 10%, £275 million a year to the rest of the pyramid. That simply would be transformational. And then it's just even think about what that figure is likely to be this time round, with transfer fees now spiralling over £100 million for a player who's not particularly well known. So just think about what that could mean nowadays, with the transfer window escalating and spiralling way beyond any previous numbers. We could be looking at figures equating to something that could be around £500 million a year. That would be absolutely massive for the rest of the game. Let's try and think about how we can change that. Let's look at rebalancing football's financial flow. So on to the meat of today's podcast. Obviously, as we said here, that community is absolutely important and should be cherished. So it's great to remember that there are still some fantastic community events happening at every single football club. And it's great to have the three people on today as we look at what community can still mean on a day-to-day basis at your average Football League club.
Niall, thank you very much. Now, we're recording this at the Valley, the home of Charlton Athletic, and we're joined by three football chaplains to learn a little bit more of the important work that they do with clubs and those who work in them. We've the chaplain of the club here, Matt Baker, Philip Wright, who rules the roost, or should that be the chicken run at West Ham, Those were the days. Yeah. Hey, those were the days. And Neil Durling, who's the chaplain of Tunbridge Angels, who play in the Vanarama National League South. Tunbridge Angels now. Isn't that appropriate? But disappointingly, the Angels came from the fact they played at the Angel Ground, where Kent, I think, used to play county cricket, and the name came from the local pub.
That's correct. Hotel.
Pub, yeah. So much for romance, but never mind. It's a good name. So, Matt, let's start with you, as it's your home ground. How would you describe your chaplaincy role here at Charlton?
So I've been here for 23 years now as chaplain at Charlton. I'm involved over at the training ground. I'm involved here at the stadium. I'm involved match days as well. I'm very fortunate that the club has really embraced chaplaincy over the years, and we've actually got 3 chaplains. There's myself over the whole club, then there's the chaplain to the academy, a guy called Gareth Morgan, and then we've got a chaplain to the women's team as well, Catherine Sales. So we've all got different roles within that, with me overseeing it. So most of my involvement is at the training ground on a week-by-week basis. I'll be in around the players, around the members of staff, making myself available. You said in the introduction about pastoral and spiritual care. We use the phrase in sports chaplaincy of being pastorally proactive and spiritually reactive. So we're in there to care for everybody, whether they've got a faith or not, or whatever that faith may be. And that's the proactive sense of having to go in, week out, being around the place. It's not about, you pop in once a month. You've got to be that presence for people so they get to know you. And then when issues arise, people will talk to you. The spiritually reactive then is we're not into forcing faith upon anybody, but then questions of faith do arise, and we're there to help people with that and process with that, and signpost as well, whether that's to another faith organisation or whatever. So that's it in a synopsis, really.
You mentioned the word issues. Is there one sort of general main issue that people come to you to talk about, or is it just anything?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think there is one main issue. It varies from a member of staff going through bereavement, a member of staff with somebody who's in their family with a terminal illness, a player who is injured long-term or short-term, a young player who might be feeling a bit homesick, marital things. It's a vast array, really, of things. You touched on mental health in terms of mental health, but there are often issues around that. The other thing we need to know as well is where to signpost people to as well. And so from Sports Chaplaincy UK perspective, and in my national role overseeing all of chaplaincy throughout English sport and particularly football, I'm very keen that football chaplains know you need to know when to signpost. Let's not step over into areas that we're not so sure about. So we've got good relationships with the PFA, Sporting Chance, other organisations as well that we can then signpost, particularly players to, if they need to talk at perhaps a deeper level than we can offer.
And that must have improved over the years because there's a big infrastructure now from what you've just said.
Yeah, massively. And that really changed after the death of Gary Speed, which is probably 11, 12 years ago now. That's when things took on a different level. We were involved before that, but after that, things did step up, and particularly from a PFA perspective in terms of that sort of support.
Philip, modern players, they have such an entourage of coaches and helpers and other people. I suppose many people will be surprised that there is still work for the chaplain to do.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it. I suppose one of the things that I've found, it helped coming from a hospital chaplaincy background before I became a football chaplain.
It's too dissimilar to West Ham, probably.
Can I say the only European winning London club this season? And Matt hit on it just now, but one of the pastoral care is about finding out what's important to people and then through those things helping them on their journey. So it is no surprise that is still a need because everybody has life. Everybody has life issues. And it doesn't matter if you're the best player on the pitch worth 100 million or whether or not you're the cleaner in the club, you've got life issues. And the job of the chaplain is to get alongside those people and help and support them through their life. And the spiritual bit, as Matt said, comes in more occasionally as and when they need it and direct it. So I'm not surprised that there's still chaplains around. I suppose one of the biggest barriers is actually people in the sports industry and the clubs themselves and in the community thinking, oh, chaplains are just religious people. Because actually, we are religious people. You know, I'm a reverend, I'm ordained in the Church of England, but my role isn't that. My role is to be pastorally caring, almost above spiritually caring. And then the religious side comes in very, very, in small doses every so often. Remembrance service or a funeral for a member of staff or a funeral for a fan. You know, we do a lot of those. But it's the biggest thing is the pastoral side. So I'm not surprised about that.
It's very much a macho environment, though, isn't it? I mean, do you think some might be a bit reluctant to come forward with their problem?
I think that's about relationships, and that's about how you build those relationships with people. I mean, how I do it, I'm a very blokey type bloke, if I can put it that way. And I hang around by the coffee machine in the canteen at the first team and let the players come to me, and they all go past me to get to their breakfast or to their lunch or to get a drink. They fist bump me, which is the new handshake nowadays, apparently. And they start to build that rapport. So, you know, you don't stand there. I don't stand there. I wear a dog collar, so I identify. They can see me. I'm the chaplain. But it's a West Ham dog collar. It's got the West Ham badge on it, and I had that made. So it's a bit unusual.
So you wear a dog collar, but you don't preach?
Not at all. No, that's not the, and that's any chaplaincy role. To be honest with you, whether or not it's in a sports club or whether it's in a hospital or a prison, a school, or wherever it is, the role of the chaplain is different to being a parochial minister or priest outside of those areas. So if you think about it, in a church, so Matt does another job as a parish priest. People come to his church. People go. They choose to go to those places. We're in somebody's workplace. They don't choose to go to that, apart from to get paid, and it's their job. So our role is quite different. We don't... Saying that, if people want us to pray for them, of course we do. If people want to talk about faith, of course we do. But that's not what drives us. My job isn't to convert everybody at West Ham to become either a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, a Sikh, or wherever it is. My job is to spiritually and pastorally care for them. And that's the difference. That's the way I look at it.
And picking up on that, I'm not a parish priest now, as you know, because I oversee within football. But from our perspective, it's about finding the right person who can handle that.
Yeah.
So when we do the induction training with chaplains, we're very clear. If you're looking to be at the front of everything, speaking, everyone looking to you for decisions, leading the congregation, and it's all about you as the central point, chaplaincy is not for you. It's under the radar, it's behind the scenes, it's often forgotten about. It's that pastoral support, and we talk about humility within that. Don't go in expecting it's about you, because it's not. And we talk about feeling like a lemon at times as well. In fact, on the training, we actually give people lemons and talk about that and say, get used to that, because you're going to feel a bit like a lemon at times. And actually, some chaplains have said, I was so glad you did that, because when I got into it, I was kind of, this isn't my domain, and even after years, you sometimes feel that. So it's really important we find the right person, yes, with the pastoral skills, but also that they're prepared just to be in the background and be forgotten about.
And if there is a religious connection to it, or somebody wants the way I describe religion is a ritual. So spiritual and pastoral care is finding out what's important to people, and then through those things making some sense of their journey. The religious care is the ritual, because every religion's got a set of rituals that go with it. So if a member of staff or a player wants prayer, that's fine, and we would do that, but it's about how you do that as well, and where you do that. You know, you don't do it in the middle of the canteen, or you don't do it in front of everybody else. It's a bit more respectful.
I want to talk about the religion and the prayers in just a moment, but Neil, let me bring you in. You've been doing this for, many years now. Tell us how the challenges have changed over time.
So I've been at Tunbridge Angels 11 seasons now. I think my privilege is that I'm at quite a small club. So pre-COVID we would have on average about 450 fans at a game, and they're creatures of habit. So people sit in the same place in church or a cafe or whatever they do at a football club as well. We're now up to about 1,000 on average. It's great, but I try and do 2 circuits of the ground every half and just stop and talk with fans. So my match day is very interactive in definite ways with definite people, and people talk to me about all kinds of stuff. You know, I don't know if I want to get married now in a few weeks' time, or I've got cancer, can we talk about that, or my brain tumour's come back, or my partner's died, where are they, and so that I find really releasing, but also because the crowd has doubled, it's double the work and double the responsibility and double the names to learn and all those kind of things. But the pressure, I think there's more pressure the longer you're there because people trust you more. So now when I ask a new player for his number, the old players go, oh, don't give him your number, you'll get texts at midnight and you'll get weird photos of his foot and all of this kind of stuff. But there's a trust there, and so I find it's easier with newer players to get to know them because the others know. And so there may be 6 or 7 that I pray with before a game, and others that have got faith will clock that, and eventually they'll say, oh, can I have some of that as well? We had a French guy at Tunbridge Angels. He couldn't speak any English, and so he went just did a praying hand sign and said, pray for me in French. So I prayed for him, and then we had a French teacher at my church, and I said to her, can you write out a prayer for me in French and write it in phonetically as well? And so the next week I prayed with him in French like Dalboy. And you could see the other players looked at him, what the hell is the Vic doing? But his face beamed like someone is speaking my language.
So what do you pray for when you pray with them?
I pray, so some I'll pray for their parents who maybe have gone through difficulties, and they asked me to pray with them firstly about that. And I never pray that they'll win.
Well, I was going to ask that.
Yeah, never. I had one lady, she came up to me and said, surely you should be praying that we win because God must like us the most because we're the angels. And I thought about it and went back to her the next week and said, what's the best Premier League team at this time? She went, Man United. I said, what's their nickname? She went, the Red Devils. I went, well, maybe that doesn't work then. So I pray that they will enjoy the gift of life and play to the best of their God-given ability.
And how do you identify yourself to the fans as you go around? I mean, how do they know the job you're doing?
I've got a massive knitted scarf that almost goes down to my feet that my sister made for me. It's the wrong colour blue. I've never told her.
Doctor Who kind of stuff.
Yeah, and so people will know me for... That's my dog collar, if you like. I'm a Baptist minister, not an Anglican, so I don't wear a dog collar generally. And also I write a piece for the programme every week, which I've been told make it explicitly about faith.
And with your picture, so they could
yes, it's got my picture on it, so they know me. I'm from that. And also we've got close links. We've got a food bank at my church, and a lot of fans give food for the food bank, and will talk to me about that as well.
We take it as read, really, that there'll be chaplains at league clubs. How unusual is it to have chaplains at non-league clubs?
I mean, I think Matt would know more about this, but I think there's quite a few that have chaplains. And the ones the ones that are committed, that are there every week and want to be involved. I had a few people explore helping me as a chaplain, but they realised, this really is a commitment. It's not a kick around with the lads, so they decided it wasn't right for them. But
I mean, if you go right through from Premier League down into the lower leagues as well, there's probably about 140 chaplains all the way through now. Half of those, bit more than half of those, are in the top 4 divisions, but a lot down at Tunbridge Angels and below that as well.
Nowadays, when players come out, particularly in the Premier League, we see a lot of them praying in their own distinctive ways and so on, which is it's acceptable now, but 25 years ago it would have been something, really quite alarming to some people. How do you deal with that? I mean, how are you working with the different faiths of the players in particular? How are you getting involved with all of that?
Neil shared his stories of praying with players. At this club, about 15 years ago now, a Christian player approached me and said, would you pray with me before a game? I've always done it at my previous club. He was on loan with us for a few months. So I started praying with him, and we developed pre-match prayers from there, and that's carried on every home game since, just about. I could count on one hand when it hasn't. Now, there's been times in that where there was one season we had Christian players, Muslim players and Jewish players all in the first team squad at the same time. And whenever a player is signed, I try to get to know them, get to know if they've got a faith or not, whatever that faith may be. So we had this one particular season where I go to the changing room, knock on the door, anyone for Christian prayers, half a dozen players would come out, I'd go out with them, we'd pray together, then they'd go back. And then the Muslim players would then come out after that. They didn't want, obviously, me or anyone else to pray with them, because that's not really part of their culture, but they wanted to go to a room where they could face towards Mecca, and they could have prayer mats, and they could do their ablutions beforehand and pray. And there were 3 or 4 that were doing that season. And I worked with them because, again, within the Islamic faith, you've got the 5 prayers to say between sunrise and sunset, and that's going to vary. In August it's going to be at certain times, but when you get to December and January, it's going to be different on a match day. So I work with them and with the manager to say, right, the Muslim players need to pray at this time. How are we going to fit that all in? And it worked. And I quite like that. You got that all going on at the home ground before a game, and they really respect it. And it's often a myth. People say, well, it won't work. We can't have a Christian chaplain because we've got Muslim players. And I say it will work. They have been the most respectful to me. When I've gone to the training ground, for example, the Muslim players will go out of their way to come over and say, hello, Reverend, how are you? Because you get faith and you've respected them. And we may agree on different things, but disagree on something. But that's not the point. It's the respect for one another, and given that facility for them to be able to pray.
I prayed for quite a few players that have got no faith, and that all started really through one player who said, he messaged me before the game and said, look, the gaffer wants me to play today. I'm not fully fit. Can you pray for me? I went, yeah. Shall I do that while I'm at home? He went, no, but at the ground, please. So I prayed with him. Played the game, and then the next week they were getting ready to go, and he went, are you praying for me or what? And I went, well, I didn't know if it was a one-off or you wanted me to. So I prayed with him, and I kept praying with him, and then the guy that he sat next to in the changing room, when I went to pray with the original guy, he went, can I have some of that as well? And so then that developed, and one of the players has moved on, and I still pray for them. So I pray, if they're away, the players, I pray for them on WhatsApp and just leave a message there. But I found there's quite a few, and I've never asked, why do you want me? No, I have asked that. I asked, why do you want me to pray for you? And he said, because it works, which I found interesting.
It's quite a bold statement, isn't it, to publicly demonstrate your faith in front of 50,000 people. I mean, that's an unusual thing to do, certainly from a British perspective. We were very much sort of, we wouldn't do that type of thing. How do you relate to that? I mean, are you surprised by it, or do you encourage it?
I do. I'm a little bit sceptical of it, if I'm honest with you. I think there's a little bit, especially with international players, there's a little bit of this is perhaps a habit or it's personal to them. It's interesting because each chaplain has their own way of doing stuff. And I'm quite low key in that sense. Mine's more from the pastoral sense. So I don't pray with many players before a game at all. I've never been really asked to do that. I will say to them, would you like me to pray with you about that, or would you like me to say a prayer about that going forward? But the ones that you expect to have a big faith, because they're the ones that run out onto the pitch and do a sign of a cross or etc., they're the ones that haven't really come to me, to be honest with you. It's the other players who perhaps haven't had that would come to me. But then again, I haven't forced myself on them either. And I suppose that goes back to what Neil was saying. It's about relationships. You've got to get to build those relationships with those players first before then I feel comfortable to go to them and say, perhaps over a cup of coffee, I noticed that you, when you went out onto the pitch on Saturday, you did the sign of a cross. Are you Roman Catholic, or are you this faith or that faith, or is faith important to you? And you have those conversations, but you've got to get that build up that trust first. Yeah. And that's the key.
I had a player, and he said to me, he was injured, and he said, I'm reading about Islam at the moment. I said, are you Muslim? And he said, no, he said, I'm a Christian, but I'm interested in other faiths. And I said, I didn't know you were a Christian. I said, I'm happy to pray with you before games if you want. He said, I thought you had your favourites, which gutted me. And I said to him, no, mate, I don't, I'll pray with anyone. But he just assumed that, and he was quite a quiet, reserved guy, so I think he'd been watching me. And then after that, prayed with him all the time at his request.
Would you say the majority get involved? Because it goes against the perception that modern day footballers, all the money they have, they're a bit of playboys and they do this, that and the other. It's interesting to hear that from what you're saying, a number of them, perhaps a majority of them, I'm not sure, actually get involved in spirituality and religion.
The majority will engage with chaplains and chaplaincy. They won't all, there'll be atheists amongst the team as well, and so they wouldn't say that they had any kind of spiritual understanding at all, some of those. So I wouldn't say the majority spiritually, but definitely the majority in terms of engaging with the chaplain and just having someone to talk to that they trust. But from a spirituality perspective, it is much more on the agenda now than it was when I started 20 plus years ago. And I think the influx of players from abroad has really helped with that. You talked about going out there and in front of 50,000, but again, particularly perhaps in the Islamic faith, where there's a public demonstration, with prayers on a Friday, it's part of their faith, that has had a knock-on effect, I've found, on those of other faiths and Christians, where, maybe this is something I can own and don't have to be kind of keeping secret, and as you termed it, that sort of British way. I've had players come up to me from a Christian perspective before and say things like, Rev, can I come to prayers today? Yeah, of course you can. This is almost an exact quote. I think it's about time I rediscovered my faith. Right. And when I unpacked that, he was saying, I used to go to church years and years ago, but I've seen others come out for prayer, and well, maybe I should look at that again, just because others are owning it and it's out there. And it's the relationship, like Phil was saying, but it's also that spiritually reactive. And coming back to that, it's I only have prayers here because 15 years ago a player said, would you pray with me? And it's developed from there. I had no match day involvement before that. Now it's developed into all sorts of other stuff now as a result of that, but it was needs led from the player perspective.
Yeah, same for me. We had my first season, we got relegated, and the captain decided he wanted me to pray before every game with the entire squad, and I went to the manager and went, are you sure about this? And he went, it's what the captain wants, you do it. So he'd say his rather robust team speech, then go, okay, now the Vic's going to pray, and they'd all gather around. You could see half of them thinking, what the hell are we doing here? And I was partly thinking that as well. And then it developed the next season. Then we had a new manager come in, and he said to me, you can pray with the players before I have them at 1:30 outside of the change room. And I said, Steve, that's not going to work for me. He's got a young family. I can't get down that early. He went, all right, and he let me in. And then when we got to the FA Cup first round for the first time in 48 years, it was in COVID, and you only allowed 40 from each squad in. And so I messaged him and said, look, I can pray with the players on WhatsApp, Steve. I don't need to be at the ground for this match because it's limited. And he went, no, you're integral. You need to be there. The players want to pray with you. Then get rid of one of the groundsmen if they want. But I want you there. And so in that 7 years, it changed dramatically. But it's about just building those relationships. I think at one of our training courses, one of the best bits of advice I got was, whatever you do, walk slowly. And I thought, what does that mean? And they said, because if you're walking fast, you're always in a hurry. If you walk slowly, you're approachable, people will talk to you. And I walk slowly because I'm now 50, but also because I think it's...
You got lost as well coming
here
today.
I got lost, it took me ages to get here.
You did, yeah, I had to go and find you.
It's a rabbit warren.
Yeah. It's a very physical game, isn't it? I mean, do you find you're at your busiest with injuries or when defeats come along? Is that the busiest time?
I think it depends on the players and who you're working with at that particular time. I mean, going back to what Matt said earlier about not proselytising and that side of stuff, I think that, the club chaplain is known as the club chaplain. And it's a bit like, well, if I need a physio, I go and see the physio. If I need something to eat, I'm going to go to the caterer. If I need this, I go to that person. If they need a vicar or a chaplain, they'll come to us. And it's what we do in between those gaps that's the really key thing. So I forgot what your question was now.
About defeats
and injuries.
Well, I'm at West Ham. We don't have them very often. Perhaps we should ask you two, defeats and relegation.
Matt, this is your area of expertise.
I will just say, though, we've had 3 chaplains at West Ham in the club's history, and I'm the only one that's been in post while we've won anything. So you said God doesn't like football.
Yeah. The interesting thing, of course, is they play in cathedrals, don't they? We call it the cathedral of football, and this, that and the other. I mean, is there a connection there, or is it just a saying?
Yeah, I think it's... I always said, before I became a chaplain, if you want real community, join church. And I still believe that. But when I got to the football club, I thought, actually, there's community here. They genuinely care for one another. They're not focused on God, but they're focused on the football team. They fall out and they make up as fans. But I think my church is 500 yards away from the club. And a lot of the fans would say, that's our church. I don't go to church physically, but through you, that's our church. So when I want to get married, or when I want my loved one buried, or when I want to do something good, a lot in COVID, like we had an aeroplane driver, as I call him, he hates that because he's a pilot, and he said, I want to do something, I can't fly, and so he just came every Friday and helped pack bags at our food bank for a year and a half, because he wanted to do something in his local church for his local community.
And it's very well known, isn't it, that when people pass on, they want their ashes scattered over a pitch. I mean, that's been around forever.
I was just thinking about that. Where we're sitting at the moment, our memorial garden is just up there. So behind a big screen, you can see that that area, little kind of copse of bushes, and there's some rose bushes. That's the memorial garden where we scatter ashes.
Why do they want that, do you think? What do they say to you?
Well, I was going to pick up on the word we used earlier, which was religion. Sorry if this sounds like a Latin lesson, but as I understand it, the word religion comes from the Latin religare, which is something to do with what ties you in, being tied in to something. Now, if you think of that then in terms of football and community, people are tied in to their club. There's an emotional tie there that can go back generationally. Yeah, my granddad helped to dig out the pitch here back in 1919, 1920 or something. The first game I came to was with him. Now he's long dead now. So there's that generational thing that goes on. So when somebody dies and they're a fan, they might approach the club and say, could we have dad, granddad, whatever's ashes scattered? Because this place means something to us. And so sometimes I've taken loads of services, or they can come up on their own. But it's about place. And unlike some clubs around this table, we've stayed in this place. We moved away and came back again. Now others have not done that.
We can't scatter ashes because we've got a 3G pitch. It doesn't quite work for us.
Right.
But you see, that means something to people. And when I take a service up there, obviously people get emotional, but then it brings back memories of standing here with dad, granddad, nan, whatever it is, over the years.
And to add on to that, and you mentioned that, we move in stadiums. I spent last Wednesday back at Upton Park at the old memorial place where they put the ashes, because West Ham have actually redoing that and have rebranded it and kept the original trees there, and they kept the original soil and dirt, so the ashes are still there.
The tree that Bobby Moore used to park his car under, apparently.
The tree that Bobby Moore parked his car under, and a few players no doubt had a sprinkle up it at some point in their life. That is still there, and West Ham know the heritage of Upton Park, and it's important for the families that I met last week who came and had a look. It isn't open to the public yet. We've just invited those families that have got ashes laid or relatives there. They loved it. They thought it was amazing. But there's a piece of West Ham history, and their life is involved in that. And even though there's now a block of flats going around it, and it's not the same environment, it's not the same shops anymore, the pub's different, this is different. In fact, the only one shop that's still there the same is a Doctor Who shop, but that's a different story altogether. It means so much to them, and I think it's about that connection. It's about, this was... I mean, when you have a football team, I don't know, in my day, in my era, and I'm only 54, that was for life. That was your team for life.
Yeah.
My dad supported West Ham, my granddad supported West Ham, I support West Ham. And that stays with you. It's like a thread that runs through your life.
And the ground is more important than a traditional burial ground.
In some ways, because you've got a connection, because you go to it every week. You don't go to a cemetery every week. But you go to those places every week, whether it be the Valley or Upton Park or the stadium or...
And we joke about losing games and this and the other, but generally there are happy memories here. Because otherwise you wouldn't want to do it. You don't want to come, it's really miserable. You want to come because you remember coming with granddad, dad, whatever, and all the emotion of that, and the smell of the place, and back in the day, the smell of the cigarettes. And it's all very evocative.
Yeah.
And
that's why you wear shirts. That's why fans wear shirts. They want to belong. They want a belonging. They want to belong to that particular tribe, group, club, whatever you want to call it. If you want to go back years and years about how tribal football is to some extent, because it's about belonging. So that's why you wear your team colours. That's why you go and pay 60 quid for a shirt every other season.
It's interesting that, because what I found at Tunbridge is with COVID and you couldn't go and watch football, we found that quite a few people who had season tickets at Charlton and at West Ham, I'm thinking of people from my church who are football fans, that they've stopped that now because they came to Tunbridge Angels when it opened a bit earlier. There was more access, and then they thought, actually, the football at this level's a better standard than I thought. I can be home by 5:15 rather than a long journey in and out. So that's been an interesting mix. So people at my level will talk about, they say, what's your big club? So you support Tunbridge Angels, what's your big club? I support Charlton or Arsenal or West Ham, or obviously not Spurs. And so that's quite an interesting thing as well. And there's been more of a drift, I think, with the money in Premier League and Championship. They thought, actually, I quite like this lower level. But you even see that in the lower level league, that there are the Man Cities in our league that will pay 3 times what we can for a player in terms of wages, and you can't compete with that. But I think also the losing, perversely, is something that people enjoy. Like, fans love talking about, when we got mullered by that lot, or we can't stand Maidstone, they always beat us. And it's almost like you moan about things that don't really matter in life, so that you get that negativity.
Yeah, that's true.
Out. You see bank managers shouting and hollering, thinking, I hope you're not like that when you're at work. I'm glad you're getting it out here.
I mean, football is going in a certain direction. The money is flooding in, but you feel the future of chaplaincy is okay. It's secure and arguably becoming more important than ever.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There's a lot more money in football now, and so the role of chaplain has changed. Particularly, I'd say, in the Premier League, where there's a lot more support mechanisms in place. But the fact that we still got the majority of the clubs in the Premier League that have a chaplain shows that they still see that there's an important place for it. It depends on the culture of the club and the leadership at the club. So I'm fortunate here because, as I said earlier, it's really been embraced. Currently, we've got a manager who really gets chaplaincy, which is great for me in terms of around the players and the player support. But that can change from club to club, whether that's CEO level or whether that's on the playing side of things as well. But it does help, of course, having the support of the Premier League and the EFL and the PFA, where they're backing it. I mean, no club has to have a chaplain, so it's not like you have to have a physio, you have to have this, that, and the other. So it's down to the individual club whether they want one or not. But the fact that the Premier League and the EFL say, we support this is something, get in contact with Sports Chaplaincy UK, they will help you to find the right person. The fact that they are backing it at that level really helps, because we're not just a maverick organisation or maverick individuals just going in. And we changed that a lot over the last sort of 14 years by bringing in a code of practice that's agreed between the club, the chaplain and ourselves. The guys here have both signed that, and their clubs have as well. And that therefore puts it into a different level, because the club says, right, well, there's accountability here. We know what the training's about. We know where to go if there are any issues. We know that it's about offering access, etc., etc. That's really important. It's important for us. It's important for the chaplain. It's important for football as well, that they then can understand it, and then they'll support that. So we become more professional, if that's the right word, in how we've done that.
Within that professionalism, we're still very fluid. We're like a liquid. Whereas everybody else involved in the club, especially, I'm just talking my experience, you've got sports psychologists, you've got analysis, you've got psychiatrists, you've got everybody, which are all doing a fantastic job. But it's almost like they've got boundaries, of course, but they're in a box and they can only go in a certain direction with a player or a staff member. And that's what you're doing. Well, I can't do that, but you need to see so-and-so who can do that bit, or see someone else who can do that. Whereas the chaplain, although we've got boundaries and we're professional and we've got a code of conduct, we can sort of go in it. We're like water. If you spill a bit of water on a desk, it goes everywhere. Well, we can do that. And we can be flexible. We can, 1 minute we might be in a prayer room praying with a member of staff. The next minute we might be sitting at a canteen. We might be walking around the pitch. We might be walking around the grounds, talking to somebody about, a bereavement or something. So we're so diverse in what we can offer and what we do. I think clubs, once they understand that and they've got a relationship with you and they trust you as the chaplain, I think they're the ones that then think, actually, this is essential. We need a chaplain in the club.
Yeah. I read a book on chaplaincy, and I found the analogy really helpful. They said you're kind of like a court jester. So you're the idiot in the room that no one takes seriously, but actually you do have the ear of the king, and he does turn to you. And I've really taken that on in my time as my role. So I don't take myself... Yeah, exactly, and the little bells on my hat. But I don't take myself seriously. So, our last assistant manager, he said to me, because I sometimes train with him, he said, I'm not being horrible, Neil, but you are the worst footballer I've ever seen play. I mean that seriously.
Yeah, I remember that.
When we played at Bible College together, I carried
you were the worst I've ever seen. And I've seen some awful football.
Well, at Charlton, yeah, that's true. And I think, for me, that's helpful. So that banter, for me, is really important. And then out of that banter come the serious conversation. I had one player, we had banter for 3 seasons, and then walking into the change room at the end of training, he just said, can I have a word? And he shared something with me that he'd been battling with for a month, And he said, that's why I miscontrolled the ball in those 2 games, once in each game. But it took him 3.5 seasons of checking me out and thinking, can I trust you? And we've probably all heard it. I'm going to tell you this because you're the chaplain, so I know it won't go any further. And people across, from fans to directors, will say that, and we take that really seriously. So you carry a lot of information that you can't share and shouldn't.
And that fluidity, that liquid, I like that as well. That's where we need to check ourselves though as well. And I have to do it. So I've got access all areas pass on a match day. I talk, I knock on the change room door, I'm in from prayers, etc., etc. But I have to stop myself and say, just because I can do this doesn't mean that I should do this. And otherwise, it's a very it's very beguiling when you've got that. And you've got to think, what's my role here? Why am I here? It's not just about trying to cozy up to players and, having a drink with them, whatever. That's not what it is. So we need to check ourselves. And, I'll say that to chaplains as well in our training events. Check yourself, check your motives, do it regularly. Because otherwise, it can muck it up for you, it can muck it up for the club, it can muck it up for all of us. And there have been stories like that, a chaplain in the wrong place at the wrong time, and then it sets chaplaincy back. So it's tremendously privileged, but with that comes responsibilities. Yeah. And ultimately, they're before the Lord. From a Christian perspective, we hold that before God in terms of how we handle this.
Yeah. I was queuing up for a coffee in a chocolate bar at a game, and there was a new girl in the tea shack, and I said, I haven't, blah, blah, blah. And she said, oh, you don't pay, do you, your staff? And there was that second of, I could save £1.40 here. And I said, no, I pay. And then the woman who's in charge, you don't pay for drink though, but yeah, he pays the chocolate bar. And there is that temptation. And fans want to know, in my situation, of what was said at half time by the manager, because I go in the change room before and after the game and during half time. And I would say, I learnt a few new words that I can't use tomorrow in my sermon. And that's kind of my strapline, really.
Well, gentlemen, it's been a fascinating conversation. I've certainly learned a great deal, and I appreciate it, and thank you for your time. It's an extraordinary area that you work in, and it's good to know that some aspects of the old game are still with us in 2023, and indeed for the future as well. Now, Fair Game, of course, works hard for a fairer distribution of wealth for this beautiful game of ours throughout the pyramid, and it's good to see that player welfare is acknowledged as an important part of life in whatever league that it's played in. So thank you for listening to the podcast. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Fair Game UK. And we've made our debut on TikTok as well. Woohoo! So we look forward to your company on the next episode of We Love You Football. So until then, from me, Graham Miller, and producer Ian Beach, it's goodbye for now.